We all think Rome was built on military might, on the courage of its legions and the genius of its generals. But what if I told you the real secret to Rome's power wasn't the sword, but the spreadsheet? That every conquest, every road, every aqueduct was part of a ruthless, brilliant financial machine that would make modern economists blush. Picture this: a Roman general, dusty from months on campaign, stands before the Senate. He's not just reporting on battles won, he's presenting a detailed financial statement. He's talking about casualties and costs, but most importantly, he's talking about the return on investment. Because in Rome, war was business. The system was brutally elegant. When Rome conquered a new territory, they didn't just plant a flag. They immediately sent in the tax collectors, assessed the land's productive capacity, and calculated exactly how much tribute could be extracted without completely breaking the local economy. It was a science of extraction, perfected over centuries. And who collected these taxes? The publicani. Think of them as ancient venture capitalists. These private companies would bid for the right to collect taxes in a province, paying the Roman state a huge sum up front. Then, it was their job to go and squeeze every last sesterce they could from the locals. The difference was their profit. Some became fabulously wealthy, living like kings. Others miscalculated the risks, went bankrupt, and lost everything. As for the provinces, they just paid. It didn't matter if the harvest was good or terrible. The tax collectors always came knocking. This created what we'd now call a self-financing expansion model. Every successful conquest brought a flood of new wealth into the system: gold, silver, slaves, and vast new lands to tax. This revenue directly funded the next military campaign. The grain from conquered Egypt fed the legions. The silver from Spanish mines was minted into the coins that paid the soldiers. The iron from Gaul was forged into the swords and spears that would conquer Germania. It was a perpetual motion machine of conquest and profit. For a while, it seemed unstoppable. Even the famous Roman roads weren't just engineering marvels. They were profit centers. The Via Appia moved legions to crush rebellions. Sure, but its real purpose was economic. It moved wine, olive oil, and pottery to markets all across the Mediterranean. Every mile of new road increased trade, which increased tax revenue. Every new aqueduct didn't just bring clean water. It raised property values, which meant higher taxes. For Rome, infrastructure wasn't a cost state, was an investment that paid dividends in cold, hard cash. But then, the cracks started to appear. By the 3rd century, the empire had mostly stopped expanding. The easy targets were gone. The frontiers became static defensive lines. No new conquests meant no fresh influx of plunder. No new territories meant no new tax bases. But the bills kept coming. The massive army still needed to be paid. The sprawling bureaucracy still needed funding. The long, dangerous borders still needed defending. So, the emperors did what desperate governments always do. They started messing with the money. They debased the currency. The denarius, once a coin of nearly pure silver, became a cheap bronze slug with a thin silver wash. It was monetary fraud on an imperial scale. Of course, people noticed. A soldier who was promised a silver coin for his service was unfooled when he was handed a piece of bronze. They demanded more and more of these worthless coins just to have the same purchasing power. This lit the fuse on a classic inflation spiral. Prices for everything from bread to boots shot through the roof. The government's response meant even more debased coins, which only made the problem worse. Imagine you're a Roman merchant around 268. The coins you accepted for a shipment of goods last month are worth half as much today. The government keeps changing the silver content, so you have no idea what your money is actually worth. Trust in the entire system evaporates. People stop using coins and start bartering again, trading grain for tools, wine for cloth. The sophisticated monetary economy that had powered the empire for centuries began to revert to primitive exchange. Meanwhile, the cost of just holding the empire together became impossibly expensive. The old model conquer, extract, and expand was dead. Now, Rome was just hemorrhaging gold to pay armies that were simply trying to hold the line. Germanic tribes on the border didn't need to defeat Rome's legions in a pitched battle. They just needed to be a constant, expensive nuisance. They just had to make the cost of defending the frontier higher than the empire could afford. It was death by 1,000 cuts, an economic war of attrition that Rome was destined to lose. The tax burden on the remaining provinces became crushing. The state was desperate for revenue, so they squeezed the farmers and landowners harder than ever. Many farmers simply abandoned their land, fleeing to the cities or becoming bandits. Rather than pay taxes they couldn't afford, wealthy landowners, seeing that the state could no longer protect them, started building private fortresses and hiring their own private armies. The publicani, the tax collectors, couldn't collect money from people who had fled or were hiding behind their own castle walls. So, just as the empire's expenses were skyrocketing, its revenue was collapsing. It was the perfect economic storm. Some emperors tried to fix things through raw force. They issued edicts, like the Edict on Maximum Prices, trying to legislate inflation away. It failed spectacularly. They passed laws forcing sons to take up their father's professions, trying to lock the economy in place. They simply seized the wealth of rich citizens. But none of it worked. You can't decree prosperity into existence when the underlying economic model is fundamentally broken. And here is the dark, powerful lesson that Rome teaches us. An empire built on the promise of continuous expansion cannot survive once that expansion stops. The entire financial system was designed for growth: new territories, new taxpayers, new resources. When that growth ended, all the bills came due at once. Rome didn't fall because barbarians were stronger. It fell because the cost of being Rome became greater than the revenue Rome could generate. The math simply stopped working. And when the math stops working, everything else, the legions, the laws, the monuments, eventually crumbles. The truly haunting part: Rome's elite saw it coming. Late Roman writers and historians documented it all in real time. The currency debasement, the tax revolts, the economic decay. They knew the system was failing. But it had too much momentum. Too many powerful people were benefiting from the corrupt, decaying status quo to allow for any real, meaningful reform. Sound familiar? So the next time you hear about the glory of empires, remember what lies beneath. Behind every triumphant general, there's a spreadsheet. Behind every magnificent monument, there's a tax collector. And behind every great collapse, there's a quiet moment when someone realizes the numbers just don't add up anymore. But by then, it's already far too late. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden side of history. See you next time.